in a way that we can ensure that all of us are bringing in our experiences. Those who've been in the site visits can also bring in what it is that you saw and heard and what lessons we can draw from those. But before we get into that, we have Barney, who's from the National Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and am I saying it correctly? This is some other department, so this is going to be a problem. But from our National Department of Environmental Affairs, who is going to who's going to set the scene for us. So over to you, Barney.
Is it on? It's on just now. Okay. So this is the right. Which one? Yeah. Is this one? Thank you very much.
Ngingakhangisa umkhukhu exolo lapho khokho lemkhukhu kini wamothi mina. Angeke. Hayibo ngawuthenga lo bekwayo. Hayibo. Ngishale mkhukhu phela ama-stove. Athi Enaberichi kajabula usingisa.
So you will notice that my talk is a marginal plan towards ecological infrastructure. I use ecological infrastructure and biodiversity ecosystems interchanging throughout the world, so that we don't get confused. So yeah, we had a fantastic patch from the biodiversity perspective. We are home to 7% of the world's reptiles and the birds and mammals, and also amphibian species, 10% of the world plants, including unique floral kingdoms, and 50% of the world's coastal marine species. So that's diversity has sports in the top number biodiverse countries in the world. So we feature in that category. And what we benefit from biodiversity and ecosystems? Well, it's basically these 4 categories of services. So we benefit directly from provisioning services that include food, fiber, etc., and also the cultural services. But these regulating and support services are critical in maintaining the structure and function of biodiversity and ecosystem. And that's critical, because without these, then we're not going to be able to get this. But at the same time, we understand that the regulating services as well as the support with are very sensitive to these direct global change drivers, and these include land seeking, direct exploitation, non-sustainable consumption, like pollution, invasive species, and others. And climate change is not only amounts to global change factors, but a much more compounding effect, because it's anticipated to have a lead that will amplify the number of these in a negative direction. So over the years, our understanding of the impacts of climate change has improved significantly around the world. This is just a quick summary from the sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the fifth assessment report. So what we have here is the impacts, and they have separated the impacts around the all physical systems, all the blue sort of signage here, and that will include glaciers, snow, permafrost, rivers, lakes, floods, droughts, coastal erosion, and so on, as well as the biological systems. If you talk to systems, biodiversity, aspect related to wildfire, marine systems. But of more importance is that over time, our attribution to climate change has increased. And if we want to zoom into our own backyard, we will see that the impacts of climate change in terrestrial ecosystems has improved significantly. So our level of confidence is medium. And also in terms of livelihoods and managed that has improved as such. So the confidence in the level in terms of understanding the effects of climate change has increased. And the point here is we are also not exempt, right? But then let's look at some examples. We saw earlier on from the special certification, the global interest in life. I picked this one deliberately because it was in the cooler part, the recent horrible charts. What you see here, you don't even see like any grass species, and I'm not sure how many of you saw on the news that hundreds of buffaloes and hundreds of people starved. They must water in the park, but because there was no grass, buffaloes to feed on and people died in numbers, and that was a huge advantage to the carnivores and scavengers because then they could just find lots of food. So the point here is as we enhance, increase conservation of biodiversity and ecosystems, we must think about the future and what sort of other requirements and the level of innovativeness in the context of how things are going to change in the future, so that we are well prepared for such eventualities, right? And this again was another example of one of those rare occasions where you find that, as most of you would know, that South Africa is susceptible to cut-off low pressure systems, especially along the coastal areas. So where you have this cut-off low system that actually coincides with what we call higher than normal tides. These were some of the results where people lost property. So these are just some of the examples that we've seen in the past. Horrible example indeed. So, but how do things look like going forward? So briefly, just to using this again graph from the IPCC's assessment report, what we have here is the increase in temperature on the y-axis. X-axis, we have time in terms of the years. So between 1960 and around 1900s or so, 200s, this is what we have experienced, and we've also developed models to test the models, train them to see if they will closely resemble what we've been observing over that period of time. But the most important thing is, I'm sure you've heard that we are pursuing the goal of limiting the anticipated temperatures in future to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So if we are to reach that goal, which is somewhere there, then we basically want to work hard at measures and as the globe, interventions that will reduce carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions faster, especially at the sources. Because if we don't do that, we are likely to overshoot that range. So as things stand, we are very much headed to breach that, ceiling of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we need to think and prepare for such eventualities, especially in the context of South Africa. So what have we done so far to begin to look into that and to prepare, going forward? Well, the first, which was the sensible thing to do, is to understand how is climate likely to change into the future from the perspective of both warming or temperature increase, as well as moisture regimes or precipitation. So this gives us a very good sense of how things are likely to change from the rainfall perspective. As you can see, the eastern seaboard is likely to receive more rainfall, and also, with intermittent periods of flooding, etc. And here what we have is temperature, and you'll see that warming is intense in the northwestern parts of the country, as well as the northeastern parts of the country, or rather the interior there, with relatively lower increases along the coastal areas. So of course here you can also have inferences in terms of drought, especially in the context of El Nino and La Nina, because we are a country actually that experiences impacts as well as a result of El Nino and La Nina. So once we have that, because Prof. Schulze spoke about the derivatives, and so we take that information and then we put it in. This is one of the models that was developed recently, specifically for South Africa, to model how these changes will impact on plants, right? So for the first time in South Africa, we were able to model the impacts on species, because before we couldn't go to species level. We used what we call bioclimate envelope approach, which treated each biome as an entity or a single species. But now with this fantastic model, it's known as the dynamic vegetation model, we are able to model the impacts at species level. And not only that, but from an ecophysiological perspective, which means we can tweak things like the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide, changes in temperature, changes in moisture regime or rainfall, etc. Things that really matter to impacting how the plants respond. So what we have here, remember the graph I showed two sort of curves. The one that overshoots the 1.5 degrees Celsius mark, which would be this panel here, this whole panel on the right, and the graph that is below that 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is this panel here on the left. And so we use those IPCC scenarios. They are known as the shared socio-economic pathways. So this is high mitigation, this whole panel. It means we reduce carbon dioxide emissions faster. But even if we do that, we are still likely to see the changes. So we modeled from 2025 to 2055, and just to get a sense of how things will change by I'm like too fast. Just to have an idea of how things are likely to change around 2085. Then we can clearly see that in terms of spatial representation, that when you move from between 2011 and 2040, this is the kind of change you see. The impact is larger on the eastern seaboard. Same pattern, gets worse once you go beyond that. So this is just to testing, because the nature of these exercises is the models develop over time, they improve. And as they improve, we have to revise these scenarios because they improve better and better. So here is just to show the changes in each biome. And as I said, we were able to do around 3,500 species from, across the South Africa's biomes. Then we went further. We said, okay, now we have an idea of these are the kinds of impacts, but how do we respond? What response measures do we need to put in place? So we did that by biome, each biome in South Africa. And then we grouped these interventions or measures according to what is the adaptation theme? Is it about land use? Is it about large ecosystem change in management? Because in some systems, you only need to change the way you manage things. In some systems, you may need to start from scratch by restoration, rehabilitation, etc. So it's different interventions for different biomes. And the size of the circle basically represents the relative importance of each option for the biome. So we are now in the process of, we've just finished the preparation. So we will be coming back and seeing more of you in each biome now to come and sit down with you to say, okay, we are in the grassland biome in the Eastern Cape, maybe. Let's sit and plan now. Do we have all the stakeholders in the room? Yes, we do. If we don't, who is missing in the room? They've got to be in the room. Then we say, okay, we agree that this is the intervention that we need in place. Therefore, how are we going to do this? And over what period of time? How are we going to fund this, etc.? So that's the kind of detailed planning and that will be taking place in the next couple of months. So now, one of the interventions as a broad or one of under what we call, so adaptation, let's put it this way, adaptation is the main sort of approach, but within that you will have approaches that are specific, that can work specifically in certain areas. And one of those is called ecosystem-based adaptation. And recently, as part of taking this work now further, we identified these broad categories that in some areas we will have to use the ecosystem-based adaptation approach. In some areas, the biodiversity stewardship approach may work well. And then in some, it's just a simple change of management approaches. And lastly, include issues of spatial planning, especially in urban areas, right? Where we see sprawling rather than, building up. So we zoom into ecosystem-based adaptation. What is it? Well, the advantage is that it integrates services from biodiversity and ecosystems, benefits for people, and climate change adaptation responses in the context of sustainable development. So why ecosystem-based adaptation? It's because it generates multiple social, economic, and cultural co-benefits for local communities. So with EBA or ecosystem-based adaptation, basically you have three things at once that are essential to the approach that you take. It's the people, it's biodiversity, and it's climate change as well. Secondly, it contributes to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And lastly, contributes to climate change mitigation by conserving or enhancing carbon stocks, reducing emissions caused by ecosystem degradation or loss. Now, what we did, we said, okay, we sat down and said, fine, we understand what EBA is, and we are clear on the advantages, the benefits that we can acquire from implementing that. So we said, okay, let's find these areas, let's map them. And it was a challenge really to map. Where do you begin when you say you want to map ecosystem-based adaptation areas? So we sat over a couple of days and debated this and said, wait, hang on. With a drawing board full of things, arrows going everywhere. And we said, no, wait, man. What we are in pursuit of is ecosystem goals and services, right? So we are clear, that's the end goal. Now let's map this backwards. in the context of EBA. Oh, sorry. So I tend to get like, okay, quickly then. So we said, okay, these are the areas where the ecological infrastructure that actually renders those goods and services is located. The demand is elsewhere. So we need to work at protecting these systems or implementing measures that will ensure the continuous flow of those goods and services. So we mapped a total of 54 municipalities. We mapped these at municipal level, and 54 was a lot of municipalities. We had to reduce these down to manageable municipalities that we can actually start to make interventions in. So we came up with these 14 municipalities, and using this criteria basically, so that we rank that of the 54, these are the top 14 of the highest priority. And so we came up with these, and we developed specific interventions, which would range from, as I said, all sorts of measures that would include restoration, change in management, etc. But more importantly, working with Sanbi recently, we were able to submit a proposal to the Green Climate Fund that is really aimed at interventions in these municipalities, which are parts of the top 14 municipalities to basically enhance resilience of the ecological infrastructure. Briefly, what about urban or built ecological infrastructure? Our take here really is to develop what we call the first national open spaces management framework, because there's a lot of challenges in areas where the human settlements already exist. There's a lot of open spaces that are utilized badly, that actually presents a whole lot of challenges. You saw the slides earlier on showed by Prof. Roland Schulze. So the start is to have a clear framework that has got a standard definition of what open spaces are in those areas. And this is a guideline in terms of how to utilize this using ecological infrastructure to, amongst other things, minimize disruptions from extreme weather events and etc. So then this is what we hope to achieve with, it's a project that we are currently working on, and it will come to an end. We should have a framework by the end of the current financial year. And yeah, that's this. I thought I will also bring it in because it's critical. Last year, we negotiated what we call the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework under the Convention on Biological Diversity. At the same time, nationally, we were completing the white paper on biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. So we aligned the two. This was the exercise that we did. What you see as T1, TT, all these T numbers associated is from the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It's got 23 targets that range from restoration. For instance, target 2 is all about restoration. Target 3 is all about conservation of marine and terrestrial systems. Target 8 is about climate change. Target 6 is about alien invasives, etc. So, so then we did that mapping, and we are now preparing to, because we've aligned it with the white paper. These goals are from the white paper. The whole thing, in essence, will contribute to enhancing initiatives of the URP, but more importantly, help us to implement both the white paper and the new global deal for people and nature consistently, so that it's clear that we are contributing to the bigger picture of all these things. And yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Thanks. So sorry I took
Thank you so much, Barney. Before you step away, I'm just going to take one or two quick questions. Let's make them questions of clarity before we, not actually discussion questions.
Morning, everyone. I just I'm not sure if it's a question of clarity, but it's a question. In the framework that you've mentioned, working with the Department of Agriculture.
All right, thank you so much, Barney. And I was especially pleased to hear you talking about how the work that that has been done, for example, with the different adaptation options for the different biomes is actually going to be taken to the people who live and work in those areas in order to see how that will work and how that will unfold. And I think that's the way that we need to be working going forward in developing these solutions together. So that's awesome. Thank you so much. So I invite you to go back to your seat, and you will come back again when we have the discussion in a short while. Thank you. So next I'm going to invite Bridget from the Institute of Natural Resources up, and Bridget is going to be sharing with us the work that was done focusing on the ecological infrastructure work in the URP. And while we're waiting for Bridget's presentation to come up, I would also like us to, so one of the intentions of the uMngeni Resilience Project was really wanting to focus on this complementarity between ecological infrastructure and the built environment. So in other words, how can ecological infrastructure be used to support and protect human settlements and people's lives? And so as we're hearing these two presentations that are going to come up next, Bridget, followed by Claudia, maybe if we can think about how that can work in real life, if you've got examples of where that has happened, or just thinking about how it is that we can bridge this gap so that we're not seeing them as two separate things.
But thanks. Good morning. I think it's still morning. It's a great opportunity to share some of the results from the URP work at uMngeni, but I've also taken the opportunity to share some experiences from elsewhere, because I think that it's good for people to kind of get a broader picture of what's being done around climate proofing, ecological infrastructure. And the other thing that I did was I started, my first slide when we get there is around some terminology, because I realized yesterday when we were in the field that I wasn't even sure that I was using the terminology correctly. And somebody had asked me about differentiating between soft and hard infrastructure, and I suddenly thought I needed to go back to the drawing board. So, so my first slide will just be to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're all using terminology correctly. And how do I make this thing go up again? Cool, thank you. So this is a presentation that basically presents work that myself and uMngeni, is uMngeni here? I think I had suggested she go to the other breakaway session, but I just wanted to acknowledge her in terms of the work we're sharing. So just starting with uMngeni, there were 3 service providers that were working there. The first was DUCT, the uMngeni Conservation Trust. And they were the main implementing agent. And they were responsible for installing the soft interventions within the grazing area. And then they subcontracted EWR, the Eastern Wetland Rehabilitation Specialists, who put in some hard interventions, which we'll talk about just now, and then the INR, which was responsible for the rangeland management aspects. So this is where I was wanting to start with a little bit about terminology. And I wanted to differentiate between the types of infrastructure, because we sometimes talk about hard infrastructure, but I think specifically we should talk about built, which are your human-made structures and networks, and ecological infrastructure, which are your natural or semi-natural aspects, elements of ecosystems and landscapes. And as Bonnie mentioned earlier, they are important for delivering ecosystem services. And then when we talk about interventions for climate proofing, this is where we differentiate between hard and soft interventions. So the hard interventions are generally permanent and involve some use of, for example, concrete structures, while soft interventions are either they're either temporary structures, or they could possibly also refer to the institutional interventions that are required to manage natural resources. And perhaps we can have a discussion about this afterwards, just to check that we're all on the same page. So the main climate change impact, I think that we recognize most clearly in Vulindlela is this increased intensity of rainfall events. So floods, causing soil erosion, impacting on the riverine systems, causing a lot of incising of the river. And so the interventions that were brought in through URP was firstly to manage flooding and associated erosion in the river channel. Secondly, to address erosion in the rangeland, especially cattle paths or human paths that are already degraded. And then thirdly, to look at improving the overall management of the grazing area. I just thought it was worth differentiating and say, well, what are interventions that would climate-proof built infrastructure? And we said built was human infrastructure and networks. So for example, interventions to protect houses from flooding. And so you could have hard interventions that, for example, building stormwater drains or weirs, and soft interventions such as re-establishing riparian vegetation and enhancing wetland functioning to prevent flooding. So this isn't part of our discussion, but for myself, I felt it was important to clarify these things. So you can't see my top. Let me try and, I'm sorry. I'll have to remember the headings of my slides. No, it's fine. So the first slide is around the hard interventions within the river system. There were a series of weirs that were constructed, and Bali, later I may ask you to come in, but basically there was a problem of the river incising deeply, exacerbated or perhaps initiated by the construction of a bridge downstream, which was causing the river to cut deeply in. So by establishing these weirs across the river, it basically, in my layman's language, one's almost like terracing the river system, but it's about raising the base flow. And by what's quite interesting was when we went to visit the one of the weirs, which is actually the one we visited yesterday. Sorry. The actual weir area has completely filled up with sediment from upstream. So we were highlighting that one needs to be looking at where is the source of the sediment and how do we address that. But what was most interesting for me is that this is starting to push water out of the main channel, and you're having re-establishment of some sort of wetland areas along the stream. So the health of that river system is substantially enhanced, and we're only starting to see that now. And I think that's the point, as these interventions take time. You don't see the impact at the beginning. So that's what I was talking about, these pools of water lying outside of the channel, and they would never have been there before because the river was so incised that it was just, you know, it was just going down. There was no lateral movement. Yesterday we went and had a look at some of the soft interventions that were done by DUCT. So there was a group of about 12 people, I think, who were working with DUCT staff and were mainly focused on paths or any waterways, basically, that were just providing or causing a lot of erosion. I don't know how easy it is to see this, but these were what we call revettes. So basically what the intention here was to try and slow water that was running down the cattle path and revegetate. So what they do is they take a whole lot of little stakes, about that long, in areas where we've worked, we use wattle waste. So there's ways of using the material you are clearing, and those get knocked into the ground next to each other, filling the gap of the cattle path. And it's quite important because with these kind of cattle paths, they're quite deep, they're quite incised. So you can't take water out of the cattle path. You can only slow it down within the path. So what happened is you put that little section of rivets in, and basically that then captures all the sediment that's flowing down behind it. And then my understanding is that was actually revegetated actively. You can wait for revegetation to happen naturally, but it's quite a lot slower. And I think we're all trying to get things covered as soon as possible. The slide on the right, so it's not very easy to see, but I don't know if you can see that there's kind of a terracing that's happened down the slope. Is it clear that you kind of, sorry. Okay. So you've got these sort of terraces as you go down, and that's because ecological, I call them sausages, the ecologs, we're put across this, this drainage line, which was completely bare, is my understanding. And what's happened is, but behind each of those interventions, you've had an accumulation of soil that was then revegetated. Oh no. Okay, I have to move at some speed. Okay, so this is the rangeland management work that we did. So it's around resting a portion of the rangeland every growing season from when the first rains happen until the first frost, and then opening up that area for grazing. In this case, we made use of electric fencing. In other parts of the country, people make use of herders to keep animals out of the rested area. I think it's very clear. You can see the amount of pressure here compared to the area that had been rested. And then obviously when it was opened up, there was a big focus of animals in the winter period on that part of the rangeland, which called for burning fire breaks around it to protect it. And this is the point, that none of these things can be done in isolation. They require a whole lot of other intervention. But the INR is doing a whole lot of other work. I wanted to share some of that, so I'm just going to run through those slides that I do have. This was a slide that was some work, some spring protection work that was done within the Sandby Living Catchments, Living Catchments project. And basically, sorry, that people were using, that they were sharing with livestock. And we came in initially, we put in a fence and then worked with women to come up with an intervention to protect the water and provide. This is some work we're doing up in the Utegela area with, we've got two projects, one with Wild Trust and the other one with Mahlatini. So this is what we talk about when we talk about using wattle waste to make brush packs, and they're very carefully placed on the contour. They catch a whole lot of sediment. You can see the sort of amounts of sediment that are captured and then one revegetates. And slowly you come back to something that looks a little more intact. This is, I just wanted to highlight that a lot of the problems with erosion are associated with physical infrastructure like roads. So this was a gully that was formed from water that's running off the side of a road and causing a lot of erosion. So this is with Matlatini. So we started off by reshaping and then putting in brush packs, and that was in about November last year, and this was May this year. It's just incredible the amount of, so putting in the brush packs, in putting in a felt mix with which happens to have TEF, which is an annual that comes up really quickly. But it's just quite incredible. The community is so amazed and are, you know, so encouraged by the fact that without too much cost, you can really make quite a big difference. And then I just wanted to show 2 slides from the Umkomazi, where we've got uMngeni water funded project, which have been running for a number of years now. And I wanted to highlight that we use the brush packs as the first line of defense, and then we come in and we establish vetiver lines, and the vetiver lines are planted just behind the brush packs, also on the contour, and that's why you get these strange we sticklers for making sure that things are done on the contour. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that through the project over the last few years, we've built installed 12 kilometers of brush packs and 5 kilometers of vetiver lines, and we've accumulated 600 cubic meters of soil, of sediment behind those. I have to show the last one. I'm sure everybody knows the problem of disposable nappies. And so we've got a new project that's funded through its funds from the UK. And what we're looking at is establishing permanent hedgerows on contours in old lands. So we've managed to put about 3, it's not meters, it's tons, 3 tons. 3 tons of nappies along into 360 meters of napier. So we basically dig a trench with a tractor and we put it in, and then we put the napier fodder on top. And this was our first harvested material being fed to livestock in the area. And yeah, I mean, people say, you know, is it so good to incorporate it into the soil? Well, at the moment, they're in our rivers. And if we can put them somewhere where they're holding water, providing a source of nutrients, I think it can work. And basically here, what we're seeing is we've got different treatments. So this is where we did nothing. And one of these would be fertilizer added. One of them would be fertilizer and nappies and some biochar, which we're also trying. So thank you. Sorry for overdoing my time.
Thank you so much, Bridget. I'm also feeling very torn because what we're hearing is just so interesting, and I wish we could go immediately into a discussion, but we can't because I'm aware of what we need to get through in the session. So not going to take any questions for Bridget at this stage. I'm going to invite Claudia to come forward. I can stay here. I can. Yeah, I can.
Good afternoon, everyone, almost afternoon. While we are uploading the presentation, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm here representing, of course, UKZN. I'm an academic, but also I'm representing what we call the RDTT team, so the Resilience Design Task Team. And we dealt with design of the climate strength, climate proof built infrastructure. So and I totally agree with you. Unfortunately, we didn't have the time to engage, but would have been awesome to have a proper integration of our works, because I can see, but maybe in the future with the upscaling of the project, we will have the opportunity. So I just want to say, so the RDT team is composed by myself and other 3 colleagues from UKZN. And I'm an engineer, and there was another engineer and 2 architects as part of the team. And what we did was to, shame, it's giving problems. Always happen with my presentation. I don't know. All righty. Ta-da! Yeah, you can just, perfect. Ah, yes, if you give me that, I will. So we started this collaboration with Afadzwa in, I think in 2011. Sorry, not 2011, 2019. Just before COVID, and then we submitted design in 2021. And then, of course, I know yesterday Nopayas presented what was actually implemented as part of the implementation plan. So very briefly, I just go through this one. We were involved only in the component 2.1, which was in fact the climate strengthening intervention for the 300 houses and community structure in Ślachzuka. So we are in the other area of Richmond as part of the Richmond municipality. So this was our team. You see our faces a little bit younger, perhaps. Our idea was, so we had to undertake the detailed design of climate strengthening intervention and also provide some advisory and ongoing support. So the general design consideration that we took into account was low cost, difficult to reach, uses sustainable materials, much easier, easy to source, locally source, and promote, of course, local labor, and try to encourage the livelihood. So this is the methodological approach that we apply. As part of our team, the RDT team, we really believe in co-designing solutions. So we actually enjoy to do a bottom-up. We apply a bottom-up approach to the design. We don't like to impose our ideas as professionals. So that's what we did. We had previously an experience through another project, Isula Bantu project, with informal settlements. But in this case, what we did was organize some collaborative, some co-production workshops with the community members involving the municipality. Of course, there were some academics, and we like to involve some community, what we call community researchers. So we identify some community members that want to be trained, and we work with them doing some surveys together, discussing the results, and to actually reflect on our design the real needs. In fact, like Ronald was saying, we are dealing with real people and real places. So that's very important, especially when we talk about adaptation. It's actually people that need to adapt. It's not only the infrastructure, it's people. So it's for us is absolutely crucial to empower local communities. So it's not only to strengthen the infrastructure, because if you don't empower people, then how people can become resilient? How can they learn also from the catastrophic events? Because we always learn from those events. So this was basically what the approach, the method that we apply. And we did, of course, a baseline study, and we came up with a conceptual design. We tested the design with these collaborative workshops, and we also asked inputs from the municipalities, of course. And then we refine our design. But that's, in my opinion, is not really the crucial part. I mean, design is a design, but I think it's only good if it reflects the real needs, and if people, the community, has learned something from that, from the process. So this was just to tell you, we did also a survey, and we let the community members, we trained them and we told them how to collect the data. And was quite interesting, actually, the results, because we were able to outline the common issues of their houses and the communal facilities, but also the livelihoods, which is very important. And we try to link this to the design recommendations that we provided. So as part of their work, the audit, they provided also a very nice photographic survey, which was very helpful for us to also appreciate the extent of the damage and the status quo, basically, of the sum of these houses. Because then in our design intervention, the climate-proof intervention, we were able to address specific issues, and they were commonly present in all the houses, and also define the typologies and some ecological infrastructure that issues that were challenges. In fact, I remember we said that retaining walls, for us, retaining walls and stormwater management system were the crucial issues to be solved just before doing anything else, you know. So anyway, so this was what we call a toolkit that we provide. We are fancy. We want to be fancy as academics for climate-proof interventions design. So this toolkit consists of a photographic survey, design and recommendation for the stormwater systems, a catalog of climate-proof prototype interventions for the existing dwellings. And then what we did was we engaged on the providing a sort of prototype design for new dwellings. If in the case where the dwellings were not in a good condition, then we provided a prototype design for new dwellings. And we were very excited to build actually a demonstration site, but unfortunately for budget challenges was not possible, but the work is still there and can be always, you know, revised and correct. And then of course there was a final report for the viability also. These were the key features, the key characteristics of our climate-proof prototypes. Consider that this was referred to the new dwellings, so something that in actual sense was not built. The implementation plan for Nhlazuka consists mostly on just the retrofit of existing dwellings. So, but this was more specific for the detail of the prototypes, the new dwellings. And I mean, we refer to some principle, passive design building principle, rational design. Especially we look at how the unit could be extended, expanded according to, you know, the new needs, and then of course sustainability, integrating, very important, the dwelling with the green infrastructure, water harvesting, solar water heating, etc., and even biodigester, and then including always space for livelihood activities. So this, I'm just quickly show you the design. This was refined again with the community members. We even include, so you can see there is a green wall, of course, is insulated, and And it looks nice, but it's very, very simple in terms of characteristic. And we even consider the clustering because that can be also more convenient in terms of costing. I just don't want to. So this is another typology, a little bit bigger, but then there is also the Rondavel typology that was specifically requested by the community members. And we thought that is why not? I mean, it's been built for 1,000 years, and we want to also keep the tradition with us. So this instead was the detail for the stormwater systems that were provided in terms of the design. And this was a catalog of climate-proof prototype interventions for the existing dwellings. We look at the different type of, we divided in terms of building envelope and external works. And then we provided specification and design details for each category. So I don't have, unfortunately, the time to show you that, but I'm sure you can contact me or Tafatwa, and they will be happy to provide you. This is just an example of the type of design details that we provided. Final remarks. I cannot believe I didn't even see the 5 minutes note. I'm surprised. I can actually breathe. I've realized I was not breathing. I was just going on with my final remarks. Look, as RDT team, it was quite an interesting experience for us to be part of this this project. And what can I say in terms of climate strengthening intervention on existing buildings, of course, is very challenging whenever you have this type of construction quality. It's really, you know, I will lie to you if I say it's easy to implement. It's not easy at all. What you can do is very small interventions that will improve a little bit, but won't be substantial if you don't fix actually the hard infrastructure and the ecological infrastructure. I really believe that what will be needed in terms of implementation, scaling up of this project will be capacity building. We really need, it's not only about creating awareness. I think the communities, and in this case, we are talking about communities, not one. There are many communities living in this huge piece of land. We need to build capacity, and we need to collaborate. And as our keynote speaker was saying, we really need to sit down all together, but including them and listening to what is the problem, because maybe it's true that we are asking the wrong questions. I think it's true. Maybe we provide also the wrong answers. Believe me, I know sometimes we do. But I think we need to listen to them, and I know it's very challenging, it's time consuming, and sometimes it's really frustrating. But I think we really cannot just think of, oh, with a magic weapon we're gonna provide and climate strengthen everything. No, it's gonna take very long time. In fact, it's a long-term project. But I think we need to build capacity and starting from small things, small intervention, and let them factor with, as RDTT. Yes, we believe in co-production and co-design, but we also think that the community members need some kind of understanding of how to build, because we should encourage them to implement themselves with self-building, because that's the reality. The government is not able to provide houses for everyone. So encourage self-building, but the right self-building, not just the one completely uncontrolled and of course not unlawful. having said so, thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Wow, two very, very interesting presentations. And I think I will take, let's see, 2 questions or comments. Thank you. We've got at the back there.
Thank you very much, presenter. From what I saw yesterday in terms of the structures, dilapidated structures at Nhlazuka, as well as strengthening thereof, it seems to me there's a lot of work to be done in terms of capacity building. You will see it yourself that there is more in terms of plastering, for example, just to single out an example, that it is totally incomplete. It has been done by somebody who has no technical know-how of what he or she is doing. I then propose that there's more work to be done. Maybe the new designs will actually do better or help the people to be more capacitated than ever before. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Claudia, do you want to say anything to that? It's just a comment, really. Hey?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. In fact, I think that we really need a capacity building, and I know, I'm aware that the process, I know of the implementation was very slow for many reasons, and we know the challenges that the municipalities have, and I mean, contracting is very difficult. So I totally agree. I can only say I agree.
No, seriously, we do concur with that statement, and that was really the original intention of this that work, the climate strengthening, that it would be like you're saying, the co-development, and that the community members would be involved in the climate strengthening, so that there would be that skills transfer and that capacity development. But yeah, we know how things happen when it comes down to implementation for various reasons. Okay, there's another hand at the back there.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm Matthew Burnett from UKZN. I'm a fish ecologist by nature, and just interested in some of the work that's been done to mitigate erosion and stuff is to put weirs in. And obviously this doesn't really cater for river connectivity. So, but it's absolutely valuable in terms of sediment trapping and the positives that come with that. Is there not, in going forward, looking at ways in which one can actually mitigate the downstream impacts of these hard-built infrastructures that reduce river connectivity for fishers, but also almost create increased flows, higher velocities downstream that scour rivers? You know, kind of it shifts the problem downstream, as opposed to kind of it fixes it upstream, but doesn't necessarily cause more problems downstream. And it kind of talks to that holistic approach. I think it's important to still do these integrations, but to kind of look at it more holistically going forward. And then in that, on that note, is it not sometimes these soft infrastructures, I feel, are actually way more important in implementing than some of the hard infrastructures because of that. But there's a lot of complexities associated with that too. So thank you, Bridget and Gus.
Thanks for the comments. Bridget, do we want to say anything to that?
Yeah, you know, I can't really talk to the decisions that were taken by the engineers in designing that, and I would think that the wetland specialists would be aware, even though they might not have been addressed in this particular case. And one of the big things with the hard infrastructure is it's so expensive, and so it questions, because, for example, at Vulindlela, a large portion of the budget went into hard infrastructure, and people didn't really have a good enough understanding of what the intention and the effect of it was. And I think that it's part of the awareness and the capacity building is we need to make people, maybe now we need to be showing people why it was done. But yeah, I would prefer to see more ecological infrastructure with soft interventions, should I say. Thanks.
All right, thank you for those. I'm going to ask you to please hold your comments or your question for a little bit later. I'm realizing that we actually haven't been engaging with our colleagues who are joining us online. So just to acknowledge them, and I just want to check if maybe there is somebody online who has a question or a comment that they want to bring in. I'm just going to need some assistance from the technical team on that. There are some comments in the chat, so nothing. Okay. All right. So we're going to swiftly move along to our panel discussion. Because our time is limited, we aren't going to do it how we normally have the panel discussion, where we have the panelists here and they are talking and really engaging. What I'm going to do is I've got two of the panelists online. One of our panelists is unfortunately ill, so he won't be joining us, but we've got Cameron and Lorette who are online, and I wonder if I can get an indication if they can hear me and if they are ready to respond to what I'm going to ask them to respond to.
100% Lungi.
Cameron and Lorette, if you're able to, I don't know, maybe put your hands up, or if I can ask our technicians to maybe allow them to unmute.
I'm here, Lungi.
Okay, thanks, Cameron.
So am I,
Lorette?
Lungi. I'm here. I don't know if they can see me.
Thanks, Lorette. We're just going to sort something out here quickly in terms of our technology. Brilliant. So welcome to this modern day panel discussion. I'm going to ask Cameron and Lorette, and I think also Claudia, Bridget, and also Barney, if you will, if you can just, well, Barney, your question is going to be slightly different because you weren't involved in the implementation of the project, but I would just like you to first maybe Bridget, Cameron and Lorette, as you introduce yourselves and indicate what work you are doing in the uMngeni Resilience Project. And then if you can just reflect from your experiences in the project, what you think, what lessons you think we can draw from how things went from, you know, the idea that was there in the project documents and all those good intentions, and now taking them down to the level of implementation. So what are the lessons that we can draw from those experiences that we need to take up as we talk about upscaling? And I think a related question to that, as you reflect on that, is what do we mean by upscaling? I think it was a question that was actually asked this morning. So when we talk about upscaling, what do you think we are actually referring to? And then from those lessons learned from the work that you've been involved in, what is it that we need to be taking into consideration as we do this this upscaling? And Barney, your question, which is slightly different, is from what you've seen and what you've heard over the past 2 days, what are some of the key things that are coming out to you that as coming from the National Department of Environmental Affairs that are critical for us to be considering as we're talking again about upscaling, and also as we're talking about different projects of this nature that really put communities first? I think as the challenge that Prof. Shweza put to us this morning, you know, real people in real places. So yeah, I know it's quite a lot, but if each of our panelists can just touch on those. Thanks. And I am going to start with Cameron, since your mic is already off. Our time is limited, so sorry, Cameron, let's try and keep it to like 5 minutes so that we can have more time for the discussion. Yeah. Thanks, Cameron, over to you.
Thanks, Lungi. I'm just trying to see if I can share screen here, but I think it's not going to come right. I did have a lot of visuals. Oh, there we are. It's easier sometimes to talk about these issues when you are. looking at pictures, it helps me speed up the presentation. So BES was involved through its trading company in component of the uMngeni resilience project called Climate Proofing Human Settlements. Just to give you some background, we are an NGO who's been involved in township development, informal settlement upgrading, environmental management work for 40 years this year. This is one of our very first projects in Ecological. It was the first in situ upgrading project that was undertaken in Pietermaritzburg. What it basically provided in 1995 was simply infrastructure in the way of roads and waterborne sewage. And you'll see there's a whole lot of rubber tire retaining walls there because the housing subsidy system and the subsidy quantum is designed to provide infrastructure in a house, but the interface between them is where this whole climate change issue impacts us. So we had to go in after finishing the project, get in a bakkie, pick up used tires from all the outlets in town and teach people how to build retaining walls. It gets worse when you start looking at building at scale. I was responsible for managing the largest township development Msunduzi had done up to 1996 in Glenwood 2. It started off as a series of informal settlements, and immediately here's our issue in KwaZulu-Natal, particularly the Midlands. We're dealing with some very challenging topography. And when we leave it to the engineers, you see a similar problem here. The interface between the housing and the infrastructure is just not there. They tried to hydroseed this bank after building an 8-meter wide tarred taxi route. It didn't take. Sorry, and what you see there is a lot of topsoil that's washed down because the hydroseeding didn't take, and underneath that V drain, where all this topsoil is washed in, is a catch pit. Because the catch pit is blocked, there's no stormwater getting through this massive, expensive culvert. And what's happening is the stormwater is running straight over that taxi route. And because the ground around that culvert wasn't compacted properly during construction, it's just caused an enormous amount of wash. So the engineers came back on site and said, don't worry, we'll build a retaining wall out of gabions. The only problem is now there's no access from the road to the house. It's about a 300-meter walk around the nearest residential access road. So these are some of the early lessons. As an NGO, we're very much a learning organization. We built into our work in the uMngeni Resilience Project. We did a lot of field work, including identifying vulnerable houses and structures, but probably the most important part of it was the development of the climate change adaptation toolkit, which you can view online on UMDM's website. It basically provides very practical information on how to build resilience to climate change, both at village, homestead, and household level. So we look at some of the challenges that we're facing. This was in Bottlebrush in Durban South. It could equally be Jikajo settlement at the bottom of Msunduzi CBD, but it just shows you people will risk their lives for the sake of being able to live in towns and cities and put food on the table. And it's only when that little stream becomes a raging storm and rises by about 3 meters that people really see the damage that can be caused. And we have a particular issue in KwaZulu-Natal and the Midlands, especially with steep slopes. So the effective erosion is far worse because of the topography that we're having to deal with. It has different effects in low-lying areas. This is south of Durban. It's the N2 National Highway, just near where the old airport was. But here you've got first world infrastructure, your real hardcore stuff, which simply could not cope with this storm. Happened in October 2018. And you literally had vehicles and containers floating down the N2. We look at the impacts of fire, we look at the impacts of high winds, and then we go through a series of planning and engineering design issues, focusing especially on the fact that, as the previous speaker said, a lot of our rural areas don't get very much in the way of infrastructure provided by the state. There are very few, I think it's about a 1 in 10 ratio of rural households who benefited from the rural housing subsidy over the last 18 years. So a lot of the work that we built into the toolkit was looking at how people manage without state assistance. So we go through a whole lot of planning issues. Planning is not a case of working off a flat drawing board or computer screen. The interface between your town planner and your engineer is absolutely critical. So this is just one illustration showing how people prefer or to create a design line from, say, their homestead at the top of the hill down to the stream, and in the process they create a beautiful stormwater channel to flow straight down there and accelerate erosion. So one of the lessons behind is anything that is man-made is likely to have an impact in terms of stormwater management. You create hard surfaces, you're creating runoff. You're creating footpaths down a hill, you're creating runoff. And on the left is an example of how to do it sensibly. Break the fall. It might take you 3 times as long to get to the stream, but at least when it's raining, that footpath is not a slippery slide. You can still access the stream. We then go in to look at some of the low-tech infrastructure that goes into a lot of our rural areas. This road in KwaZulu-Natal, a builder's delivery truck actually slipped off here when one of the days when we were on site. But you can see all they've done is cut a graded road through a hillside, created a massive bank, which is now eroding. They attempted to put a U-drain, earthen U-drain along it, but it wasn't lined, so it's suffering major erosion. And that road is just about in danger of being undermined. A lot of what we've built into the toolkit, as I said, is very practical interventions. Particularly in areas which are deep rural and you don't have access to a build or a cash build. There's not a single piece of manufactured material goes into this path rehabilitation. It was like a downstream chute of water, and it's just been broken for, and they're using quite often in, say, Isabella Wildlife, they'll use metal droppers to anchor these logs into the ground, where you don't even have access to metal droppers. You can just cut stakes and drive them into the ground and then lean your brake logs against it. When we were looking at the houses, you'll know a lot of our traditional dwellings are wattle and daub, and they have to be rebuilt after every summer rains. This is a really, really simple way of, low-cost way of repairing a wattle and daub house. Simply take some chicken wire, nail it around your poles, and then you can infill it with, you can use full cement, or you can actually, for this kind of repair, because the chicken wire provides reinforcing itself, you could even mix your cement with some local soil just to help it stretch further. So that's just a few illustrations. I can show you in 5 minutes about what the toolkit aims to achieve. It does have a lot of information also on new buildings, foundation design, goes through construction of culverts, suspension bridges. This is just a little taster, but the emphasis is on it is to say 2 things. As far as lessons are concerned. One is that we need to empower our rural communities who don't get state assistance to have the knowledge and skills and a little bit of resources to be able to look after their house and the immediate environment around it. The solutions we came up with there were typically around 10,000 Rand average per house, whereas the cost today of building a subsidized BNG house, which is only 40 meters, UKZN, 60 meters a pipe dream, that is 150,000 Rand. So we were working with a fraction of what we're spending. on formal housing. And because of the backlog of informal settlements we've got in the country, a lot of our focus is now moving on towards upgrading informal settlements, as BES did start in 1995, simply because the available funds can't provide for everybody to have a free house and water and sanitation. So the emphasis on basic services now, and that means the toolkit is even more relevant because people will have to look after their own housing needs going forward. How you upscale it? Very, very simply, knowledge is power. The lessons that we rolled out and took to city communities within Mzuka to do on the ground training.
Cameron?
That is where it has to be rolled out because there isn't sufficient funds to provide everyone the house. Yes.
Sorry.
We're done.
No, okay. Thank you. I really do wish we had more time for this discussion because I think what you presented would open up a lot of discussion here. I'm even thinking that this would be a great opportunity for us to review that toolkit and really workshop it with the different communities. And I think a lot of what you're saying is really important about you know, having integrated solutions. And I'm thinking things like that meandering path up the hill, that it makes sense on one level, but how do we make that make sense to somebody who is carrying a bucket load of water on their head, you know, and having to do a journey that is 3 times as long. So I think those are important considerations that I think we need to make as we review that toolkit. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Lorette from DACT. Lorette, I will also come in and interject if we go over the 5 minutes, as you still need to hear from the other panelists. Go ahead, Lorette.
Brilliant. I'll try and keep it really short. So hi, everyone. I'm Lorette Schultz. I work for DACT. I'm the project oversight person. I call myself that. And was part of the Vulindlela URP project. Our role in it, Bridget has presented on our behalf very nicely. We were mostly involved with the soft infrastructure, which was the rehabilitation of 12 kilometers of riparian zone, as well as 200 hectares of grassland. Part of that was, as she presented, was a lot of cattle paths. So our main focus on the grassland was actually just working with soil erosion, and there was extremely thin soil layer on the whole of the grassland, or most of the areas. So we found that quite a bit of a challenge, but the erosion technologies like the eco blankets and eco sausages, we all have different names for them, really assisted in that. And I was so excited to see afterwards actually how the grass is reestablished after just having some rest, and some of the active, how the activities has actually assisted it. As part of the riparian, rehabilitating the riparian zone was the hard infrastructure as well as the soft infrastructures. And the way it was designed is that the two would complement each other. And in there is a lesson learned. We found that because of budget and because of time constraints, we had to prioritize some of the initiatives that was implemented. And luckily, partway through the process, we actually evaluated to see from what we've prioritized and what has been implemented, how is the two combining and working together, and found that in some places that some soft infrastructures was now redundant because of the specific hard infrastructure that was implemented. And in other spaces, there was now additional soft infrastructure actually required to help with some of the effects of what was like the rising of the water levels, it now running off the sides, and we had to do a little bit of additional soft infrastructure. So it just links to what we said previously, is just working adaptively so that we, as we implement, we see what is happening, keep measuring, see where do we have to adapt, what's working well together and what's not. Our start in this project was very bumpy, I have to say. So one of our biggest lessons learned was community engagement, let's put it like that. So like everybody else has said before, it's that co-creation, the planning together. We came in with a focus on environment, and even though we had a very strong focus on working with community, I think the way that we did it was very much wrong. It was still very much a top-bottom approach as opposed to fully working with community on the ground, first capacitating. And when I say capacitating, there's lots of local knowledge. So it's working with everyone, it's their community, understanding what is the issues that they experience in their community, and then how can we, in terms of environment and climate change, how can we work with them to make the best of this open space. So there's very much linked to the open space management, as well as a little bit of the EBA. This project actually had a little bit of everything in it, because it had the EBA principles, it had the stewardship principles, and we tried anyway with that. But I think going forward, that could be deepened. So when you talk about scaling, doing it deeper, not necessarily more places, but deeper, so that we really work with community on the ground and see what else can be done within that space. Our biggest lesson learned, one of the biggest one, was that you have to work with local people, give them the capacity, it is their environment, and then by the time that we leave, they've got the capacity to manage their own environment, do the maintenance that's required for the hard infrastructure, do the maintenance that's required for the soft infrastructure. And specifically in this area, there was a lot of competition for land use. So for us, it's also looking and going deeper is how do we deal with that land use competition? If we're talking about our open space in terms of climate change and what that means, both for the river, the riparian zone, as well as for the community themselves, then how do we work with traditional leadership? How do we work with kind of a spatial plannings to see how do we trade off? How do we work with both environment as well as community development? How do we do it best with community? And I agree there we have to work with people understanding them why. So what is climate change? Why do we have to work? Man, you just changed the screen. I can see myself. Sorry, I'm put off. How do we work with community so that we can achieve best for them? Thank you, as well as for the environment. Okay, so in short, that's lessons. I quickly want to quick tell, sorry, Linky. So we came in there, one of our deliverables was we have to clear 50 hectares of wattle. So we just thought, okay, this is going to be easy. We identify who's the owners, and now we're going to clear the wattle. No, we ended the project with not clearing any wattle, only the baby wattles that grew around. And why? Because the community had a deep sense of ownership of that wattle, because they had specific things that they did with that wattle, and it helped. So it was shade for the cattle, where when it gets really hot, they use it for traditional things. They use it as a source of income. So it's things like that where, yes, because they are very thirsty plants and they're affecting the quantity of the water, there's a trade-off between, so then how do we help you keep that ownership and the use for it, but also have a benefit for the riparian zone, the river, and its quantity. So coming to a compromise of clearing within a buffer zone of the river, but we weren't actually able to clear the massive stand of wattle. It's just one of the lessons learned. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks.
And from what you said to take forward. So now for our three panelists that are in the room, I'm going to give you less time than Cameron and the rest, as we were hearing from them for the first time. So if you can just share one thing from your reflections on upscaling and what it is that we need to take forward.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I think I concur with Larette. We definitely need to learn from people. And I agree. I mean, as I said in my presentation, the capacity building program is definitely something that should be done. What I found, in my opinion, was that the target of the project were very ambitious, extremely ambitious. And of course, when you set up the targets, you have no idea what's happening on the ground. So I know it's not possible, but project should allow to change a little bit the target, the specific targets, when you go along, you know, basically, when you know better the context, because I think it was very, very difficult. Even in terms of deliverables, I found that, for example, we need to, the communities need to have something. You need to leave something with the communities. So they don't care about our deliverables, our reports, whatever we do. We should leave something with them, and that can be something physical. Of course, if it's possible, that's great. Like in this case, the retrofit of their houses. But since the budget doesn't allow that, at least living with something. And that, for example, would have been, in our case, a practical manual for communities on how to retrofit. So it was our intention to actually produce that, but there was no time, unfortunately. But just lesson learned. We need to leave something with the community. So instead of thinking only of our deliverables from, academic point of view, or, from the municipality point of view in terms of numbers, we also need to leave something with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm going to hand over to Barney.
I thought I was going to be the last, so we go with the ladies first, but it's fine. Yeah. So a couple of things emerging from here is that I think we are dealing with, let me call these issues or aspects that are interconnected and especially impacting on livelihoods. So then, one's could you look at it from the integrated approach that will in some cases require trade-offs in terms of solutions, and we've had many examples, so it's leading us to that. If we are to be realistic, these are complex issues that are sort of interlinked, that impact livelihoods. So therefore we may get to a point where there'll be trade-offs, but trade-offs that need to be properly guided. Again, what I picked up here, the importance going forward, coordination is going to be critical. Do we have all the players, that we need, especially going forward? Having heard what is coming out of this project, I mean, I see we've got Claudia here, so we are beginning now to weave in all these things in the environment, built infrastructure, but also human settlements that, and all sorts of things. How do we weave these things together? But more importantly, to fully understand the relationship of people with the environment, who do we need in the room? Which social scientists, specialists in that regard, who will help us deepen our understanding, so that when we get to those points of trade-offs and we make informed what you call again. Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
I'm afraid you're going to bring up everything that's going to come out in the discussions. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, clearly Bonnie has got a lot to share. Thanks, Bridget.
Thanks. I think I'd come back to the need to strengthen the institutional infrastructure in the area, because, whether you're working with a group of spring users around ensuring equitable access to water and people sharing the responsibility of maintaining the spring, or whether you talking about the rangeland work at uMngeni and the fact that the local dip tank committee doesn't have enough institutional strength to be able to control the activities of all livestock owners, because a lot of them don't actually live in the area. They live somewhere else and their cattle stay in the area. And when there's a meeting, they send their herders to the meeting, and their herders can make no decisions. And in fact, the herders' priority is to make sure the cows eat today, not worrying about 5 years' time. So we've spent quite a lot of time starting that process of institutional strengthening, financial literacy, seeing how you can help, for example, to assist the dip tank committee to actually generate money that they can use to implement or to support their activities. And those aspects can't be ignored. We can't get focused on the physical and the technical aspects without dealing with with strengthening the people. So it's not just technical capacity building, it's just about people working together more cohesively. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Claudia, Bridget, and Barney. Thank you also to Lorette and Cameron for sharing your views. What I'd like us to do now is just to have a few minutes for everyone in the room, and we'll see how we can coordinate for our colleagues who are joining online, but to take what you have heard from this morning's session, as I indicated, those who were in the field visits, to reflect on what it is that you saw and heard there, but also from your own personal experiences, because we all are doing something somewhere. And think about what that means for upscaling, as we've spoken about, and for future projects. So if we can just gather, as we are, in groups of maybe, let's say, like 6 to 8 people, and just reflect on those questions. And those are what comes out of that is what we are going to take forward as recommendations that we'll hopefully be able to bring into the plenary tomorrow. So we'll have, it's not a lot of time, let's say 10 minutes for that discussion. And it's really important that as we do that, we are hearing all the voices from the different groups that we have in the room. Okay, while everyone's having that discussion, I'm going to look at what's happening in the chat. Okay, all right, let's go.
Repeat the question, what we're supposed to be discussing, because we're not sure.
Okay. I'm going to repeat the question. You are reflecting on what it is that you've heard, what you've seen, from your own experiences, how it is that we need to, what we need to be considering as we talk about upscaling climate change adaptation projects. And also just talking about what does it mean to upscale. We had an example from Lorette that it means we need to be deepening, but what does it mean for you? What needs to happen? Okay, everyone. I think these discussions could go on for a good couple of hours. And if we can have your attention. Your attention, please. All right, I'm really sorry to cut off these discussions. And really, this is actually the intention of the Ecological, isn't it? To get the discussion going, have the conversations, ask those questions. But unfortunately, we do have a time constraint and lunch is calling us. So I'd just like us to take just a few minutes for each of the groups to maybe just reflect on one, or if you really must, a second points that came up from your discussions, considerations that we need to take forward. I will share just very briefly. I think the main thing that came out of the colleagues that were discussing online was the issue of upscaling being deepening and what that means for taking that right from the start at projects conception level and ensuring that there is capacity development on all sides, the communities that the project's going to be working with, the project development team, and so on. So that's the key thing that I'm summarizing that came out from the team that was online. If I can have, I think we had 6 groups here, just one person from each group. You can just stand up and just say one thing that came from your discussions. Okay, we'll start with the group at the back. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. What transpired from the discussion is that we started with the unpacking of the term itself, upscaling. What is meant by upscaling? It simply means the action of increasing the size or improving the capacity or quality of something. Further to that, we actually came up with some issues, taking issues up to the national level. For example, is an example that is related to upscaling itself. We were then saying that instead of taking issues right now, it's better to level the ground at a provincial level first, and where these projects are actually happening. Furthermore, we said there's more funding that is needed. There seemed to be more funding for infrastructure without considering other issues like the soft infrastructure. We were saying that it should also be considered collectively, as much as you are dealing with issues of infrastructure, but you need also to consider the soft infrastructure going forward. Community engagements versus tribal authorities. There seemed to be more focus on community engagements without including the tribal authorities. We are saying that that should also be considered in the toolkit going forward. There was also a question that said, what informed them to start a project? For example, we cited the Vulindlela project. Was there also other areas that should be considered at the grassroots level? Where we were arguing on this one to say maybe the historical data is the one that informed that the project should be started or implemented in that particular area. There was also an issue of skilling more people at areas where these projects are actually taking place, instead of going for upscaling at this point. There might be other areas that are neighboring areas with, nearer to where the projects are taking place. Vulindlela and that other place, which I've just forgotten its name. But they are saying that there should be some form of expansion in this area of maybe Howick, Pietermaritzburg, or Midlands, Natal Midlands. Then you go out to other areas and see. You look at the success stories, you consider, you have a data that is related to that, and the utilization of resources sparingly instead of wasteful expenditure.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Just a few more that
stop you from sharing the last one in case you end up covering all the points that the other groups were going to bring in.
Oh, okay.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to that group. Okay, we've got another group here in the front. While you're sharing what has come from your group discussion, that 1 or 2 points, if it's something that somebody else has already raised, let's not repeat it. Let's bring in the new points. Thank you. You need a mic? I think you might have
Afternoon, colleagues. I'm already standing between you and lunch, so I'm not going to be long. Yeah, and I think the other group has almost taken all our points. But what we then discussed in our group, just to add, we also looked at initially we defined upscaling and downscaling or whatever that was. But what we also learned, and we have someone who is in the agriculture project, was that when we do this projects, we also need to be careful of making promises or creating expectations when we do these projects. And one of the lessons learned was that there were promises that were made in the community which were not fulfilled. And that should be a lesson that going forward, let's do our research, let's implement, but let's try and refrain from creating expectations or making promises that we somehow fail to fulfill. We also then said we must just consider spending more time and understanding in terms of the indigenous knowledge from the areas where we do these projects, because that also assists. There's a history behind what has happened before. When Prof. Schultz was talking about, he really emphasized the importance of history, and that would assist. Last one, I think it was the collaboration of different institutions to strengthen the local and traditional institutional memory within all the organizations or all the participants. We felt that's also important just to note going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much to that group. Can you pass the mic to that group over there and then this group in the front?
Good afternoon, colleagues. As other groups have already mentioned some of our points, I think one of the key points that or 2 points that we want to elaborate on is, as the project is ending, we think it's very important that as the beneficiaries, which is the municipality, is expected to basically continue with this. They need to be here and actually be given the guides and tools on how to continue with the project activities to enable capacity building within the communities. And we also identified the need to actually, during the project, to be able to just stop and actually review, to be able to have to review and incorporate the story of the community's needs and as well as the project, so that it's not just the top-down approach of which the project actually did. And also we see the need that the community needs to be provided with almost like a toolkit on to enable them to, sustainably carry this project through. And yeah, obviously dealing with capacity building. Group members, if I haven't, they can add nothing?
No, they can't add at this stage. They can add maybe over lunch. Thank you so much.
Okay, my group members are just warning me that we have nothing to add, but I'm gonna come up with something. So I think I want to build on to what she was talking in terms of what we said in our group. It's more like there's a lot of scaling that can be done. We shouldn't be limiting ourselves to just upscaling, and we can think of things like deep scaling, vertical scaling, fancy scaling, and all of that. And also the importance of using our community members as lead researchers of their landscape, because they know the landscape better than we do. And also it also allows for integrating the different types of knowledges, so that we are able to do things better when we're doing them together, for greater impact, and also looking at how do we develop frameworks that are flexible enough to adapt to the different situations of the different landscape, because all the landscapes are not the same. So that's what the group can add. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, I better come to a different place, shall I, for you? That's okay. Sorry, let me make it easier for the camera. Okay, there we go. Good?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so our group spent quite a lot of time talking about process and how in many of the interventions, some of the process linkages were broken. There were institutional role players that were missing, or there were community member voices that were missing.
And what we spoke about was how the investment in the soft process work needs to be continuous from the beginning to the end, and how sometimes some of those process discussions had happened at certain times of the project, but 8 years is a long time. And things get fixed and things break and institutions change and people come and go. And an agreement with one person doesn't necessarily mean an agreement with another person. So our message for scaling was how important it is to put sufficient resourcing for the process work all the way through, and to expect that things will change because they do. Implementation is messy. So we can all sit designing principle-driven, perfect projects on paper. And then anyone who's been in the field knows that it always goes wrong. And how do we put enough buffering into the way that we deal with the process work and explain to the donors that it's not just about the tanks and the assets and all of those things, but sufficient resourcing into the soft capacity building process work so that the glue of the project sticks. Yeah, happy group. You can't add anyone.
Thank you so much, Mandy. If you can just pass to that group, the one with the gentleman in the blue jersey.
Thank you. So most of the things that I'm going to bring up, I think, have been touched on by previous groups. But
Sorry, Alande, please, if they've been touched on, don't bring them in. Just okay, bring one thing and then.
Okay, so we had two emerging themes basically. So one was communication and the other was really trying to understand community needs as well as their priorities before we come in with the project. So on communities, it's about establishing some sort of strategy or way of communicating between your municipality, your traditional authorities, as well as your communities. And there needs to be some sort of engagement, especially on where we build and how we do things within a community. So it's not, it's very important for even us as practitioners to communicate what makes sense in terms of where you build and where you plan your developments. And then also the traditional authorities need to communicate with their communities as to what that means and where we need to build. And then also in terms of strengthening communication at multiple levels, looking at a bottom-up approach as well as a top-down approach, and coordination between stakeholders, co-creation of knowledge. And okay, on understanding community needs and priorities, it came up that there are feasibility studies that are done before a project is even brought up, I guess. But people are not even involved in those feasibility studies. So it would be important for communities to be involved from inception phase of the project. And also so that we identify their issues before we bring our solutions, especially around climate change. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think that was the last group. No. Oh, sorry. Let's hear from the last group. My apologies.
This is so weird. I'm being nominated now, but okay. Sislungi, please accept my apology because I'm not bringing anything new. But
you'll just share one thing then.
Yes, I'll share one thing. So it was mainly around, we spoke about linkages and trade-offs and derivatives and so on. And it just highlighted the need for, the need for understanding our system and taking a systemic approach and trying to give time to unpack it. And as we design projects, we are engaging with the whole system, not a portion of it. So I think that's the key thing. And from that, it's investing in social processes to continually evaluate, continuously kind of think about our approaches. So that's the moral, monitoring, evaluation, reflection, and learning. So giving time to those processes, investing in social processes, collaborative processes is key for, being able to adapt and learn and improve our processes and our approaches. So that's the main thing. And there's a bunch of other stuff that we did say, but it's because of time.
Thank you for your consideration. Okay, wow, that was really amazing. I hope I haven't left any group out this time. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I think that's been like some really rich stuff that came out of those. Thanks, you can just put it in the front there. That came out of those discussions. I'm sorry that we went over time, but I'm feeling like it was worth it from what has come out. But yeah, my sincere apologies. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for bringing yourselves into the session and for contributing to these discussions. And I think you all deserve a round of applause, as well as a huge thank you to our panelists. So just a quick announcement. Is that okay? Lunch is served in that area. Just you'll open the doors, and I think you'll be able to make our way out there. We are hoping that the next session will still be able to start at 2 o'clock. We'll see how it goes, how fast everyone can eat, I guess. And then the next two sessions, which are also parallel sessions after lunch. Session 4, which is sustainable and resilient food systems, is going to be in the chapel. So I think that's outside that way. Christine or any of the team members will be able to direct you that way. And then the other session is going to be on transformational development to build capacity, and that's going to be in this venue. Okay, enjoy your lunch, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you.